So before we get started with our questions, and just want to say it's great to see so many familiar faces on the call. Thanks for joining us. And I'm going to make a quick kind of introductory statement about where we stand with athletics at this point in time at Geneseo, and then we'll get into the questions that were presented to us and some that we came up with on our own that we thought people might be interested in. So as we begin our 2021 academic year, we want all of you loyal alumni to know that we've been working and reworking our plan throughout the summer in order to give our student athletes the safest, most productive experience possible, given the guidelines, suggestions, and regulations that have been dictated by the CDC, New York State, SUNY Central, SUNY Geneseo, and the NCAA's resocialization of sport document. With the necessary safety precautions in place, we're ready to welcome the student athletes back for practice sessions, which will begin on Monday, September 7th for cross country, equestrian, field hockey, golf, our new program, women's golf, the soccer teams, tennis, track and field, and volleyball. These sports will continue for their fall seasons through practicing through October 31st. Lacrosse and softball will then hold their non-traditional seasons from October 1st through October 31st. And the winter sports of basketball, ice hockey, and swimming and diving will train from November 1st to the end of the semester. It's important to note that our department is called Intercollegiate Athletics and Recreation, so our planning has included developing creative ideas to support the entire student body in regards to fitness, recreation, and wellness activities. Our intramural and recreation director, Brooks Hawley, will be continuing to plan for the rest of the student body, and the coaching and administrative staffs will be supporting Brooks's work more regularly than during a typical academic year. And lastly, we'll continue to monitor the pandemic status, making necessary and appropriate adjustments to our plan as we continue throughout the semester. Now I'll turn it over to Brett for the question and answer period.
Thank you. Just a reminder, these questions, most of them were submitted by our registered guests, our registered alumni. So we'll get right to it. Our first question for the panelists. When was the decision made to postpone fall sports, and why was that decision made?
I'll take that, Brett. Thank you. As athletic directors, we were meeting pretty much since this first spring sports were canceled and the winter championships were canceled. We were meeting basically every week to look at how can we deal with the pandemic, what are the things we need to worry about, what could we do going forward, how can we kind of come up with some plans. And it was funny because many of the plans that we would come up with on one Monday, by Monday afternoon, Tuesday, Wednesday, we had already had to change it because of things that came up with the pandemic. For most, if not all people that are dealing with it, it's something that no one has ever had to deal with in recent time. And so a lot of the stuff is you learn, you change, and then you have to start over again. So approximately the decision for the fall semester to stop, in a sense, or not participate in athletic competitions came about mid-July, when the NCAA came out with their third resocialization recommendations. And the biggest one that was involved in that included the word testing. Prior to that, it was screening. And the difference is screening allows you to just check a box that you haven't had any of the particular concerns with the pandemic items. But when you get into testing, there now becomes a large cost part of it. And so on campus, we have a machine that can do some testing. It kind of was decided that that would be more for problematic areas, students who came about with issues dealing with the characteristics that you could get from the virus. And that testing was at $23 per test. There was a limitation on how many tests could be done in an hour. And the NCAA recommended that you would do that 72 hours in advance of participation. Well, if we just went with the minimum amount of contests that the NCAA was saying, if you wanted to still remain in good standing and you had to have, the cost for us at $23 a pop would be just under $27,000 for the fall sports. Quite a large increase in expenses. There was also drug-free sports, which is out of the Midwest, has an option too that you could use them, but their cost was $140 per test, extremely high in terms of what we could afford. And as each of the campuses looked at this, it became almost impossible to participate in competitions. And so after quite a long couple of days on the phone with the different athletic directors and the commissioner, we decided that it would not be possible to participate with any of our fall sports in competition or our winter sports that compete during the fall semester. Prior to that, we had looked at things of east-west, kind of trying to minimize travel, and looked at how could we do this at a cheaper cost also, because travel is a big concern if you're trying to keep the bubble, the terminology that's used many times on your campus. If you're having people leave or other schools coming in to compete, you can be transferring viruses and things of that nature. So it all came down to really kind of cost and safety for the students and the campus. And so we kind of basically went forward with we would not participate. But we wanted to keep the students involved, and that's where Assistant Director Gagne talked about that we will be practicing on a limited basis within the fall semester for the fall, winter, and non-traditional sports of the spring. So that's kind of where we have landed at the moment. We're hoping and we're doing plans now that hopefully in January we would be able to start up with our winter and then spring sports being able to compete. The winter sports would be at a limited basis because we don't have the fall where we can compete, so it would be cut down in the number of contests. But then going forward, hopefully we get to the spring where we might be able to, if things were in a better shape, to be able to do most of the sports there. So, Brett?
Thank you, Mike. Obviously, a decision that was not made lightly. How does the loss, and I guess, Jess, this is more of a question that deals with compliance. How does the loss of the fall season impact the student athletes from an eligibility standpoint? And what happens from an eligibility standpoint if the fall sports are played in some manner in the spring?
Sure, thank you, Brett. Good afternoon, everyone. And, I just, to quickly echo Mr. Mooney, none of these decisions have come lightly and have been difficult. And certainly as an administrator, you're heartbroken for the athletes and the people and the community that you serve. But in the midst of this pandemic, the NCAA has taken measures to help alleviate some of the loss athletes are feeling right now. I'll start with what they did for the spring earlier this year. When all spring sports were canceled as a result of the virus, sport teams were not charged with a season or semester of eligibility. So basically the NCAA issued what they refer to as a blanket waiver. So no spring 2020 athlete was charged with either. Then proactively this summer, the NCAA issued another blanket waiver for the upcoming 2020-2021 academic year. And this waiver states that student athletes would not be charged the use of a season and would also receive a 2-semester extension if the team did not exceed 50% of their maximum contests. So however and whenever a fall team is afforded the opportunity to compete, the use of a year of eligibility will be contingent on how many contests they are actually able to play. So I hope I explained that well enough for you to understand the NCAA language can be a little tricky, but all in all, the NCAA has really made a concerted effort in the midst of this pandemic to preserve eligibility if athletes aren't afforded the full scope of their student athlete experience in terms of being able to.
Thank you, Jess. George, I think that's a perfect segue talking about the student athlete experience that Jess just mentioned. Without competition, what will that student athlete experience look like this fall and going forward? And could you maybe touch on how practices will work and what else the athletic department is doing to keep our student athletes engaged?
Sure. So moving forward, like I said, starting September 7th, that group of sports that I mentioned, they'll start practicing, but it will be limited basis. It'll be 3 days a week, and the student athletes will be put in pods of 10 student athletes or less. Those pods are going to be designed to cut down on the interactions, cut down on the amount of traffic that goes to the training room on any given day. The coaches will be responsible for forming those pods, and our plan is to have those pods be extended to anything that happens off the playing field, or things like study groups, meetings, voluntary workouts, anything that the students do outside of their official practices. We're hoping that they stay in their pods of 10 to kind of cut down on the number of interactions that go on. So again, we will be working with the coaches to come up with who might be practicing Monday, Wednesday, Friday, who might be practicing Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And again, the staggered schedule will limit the density in the athletic building, specifically the training room, along with limiting the sport-to-sport contact in the practice facilities that house the multiple teams, such as the college stadium. We want to cut down on the men's and women's soccer team having too much contact as they go in and out of the stadium, or the field hockey team goes in and out of the stadium. If all goes well and we continue to hold the practice and training sessions, we're hoping that the teams will be able to expand to their full roster participation and move into more large group activities beginning on October 1st. In addition, we're going to continue to find and offer safe and meaningful team bonding activities, leadership development opportunities, and what's very important to us, our community service endeavors. So we're gonna try to continue as best as possible to offer all those types of opportunities to the student athletes.
Thank you, George. Our next question is a little bit more targeted and sports specific. What about sports and teams that are inherently more social distance in nature, more individualized sports such as tennis, track and field, cross country, equestrian, and golf? How will those sports be handled, and will they be handled in the same manner or differently than our team sport activities?
I can start with this one, Brett, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to all of you. It's a question we're asking of ourselves, right? We are handling all of these teams a little differently, but we have to follow the same density and frequency rules that are being set aside by the NCAA, by the county health department, by Lauderdale Health Center. I've had the question a lot. Well, why can't we just run cross country, right? We're separated. But think about the start line and the finish line of a cross country race, right? It's utter chaos. We've had a lot of questions about a sport like equestrian. It's just a rider and a horse. But you have to think about like George brought up, the density going into the building, right? If we have 20 people passing each other going into the barn, sharing shovels, sharing saddles, whatever, we're not doing our service to Geneseo. Athletics can't be the reason Geneseo has an outbreak. So we're trying our best to take these individual sports and the team sports and doing the best we can. I had a conversation with cross country the other day. They have a large roster, and track and field, sets of 10. The track and field team would be in 12 straight hours of practices. So we're going to allow multiple pods. If you think about 10 athletes on the track and 10 athletes at the throwing circle, okay? It is multiple pods, but they're in different spaces. So we've thought about the individual sports. We've thought about the team sports. We've thought about the difference between soccer being on a field that's 100 by 200 versus volleyball being in a small gym. And there are certain things, basketball and volleyball are going to be limited by what the governor says using a gym. So we can go in the basketball gym, have 6 players at 6 baskets shooting. That's vastly different than basketball teams scrimmaging, right? So we're taking each of these teams, we're looking at them separately, but we still have to have some consistency because of frequency and density and guidelines. So, it's a little bit of a roundabout way to answer the question, and I think Mike has some more to add to this one, but we are taking each team into account individually, but knowing that we have to maintain these frequency and density for the sake of the campus and the community around us.
And just a couple quick notes with that. When we actually do some things like with equestrian and you have one rider in the ring and a coach and they can be 6 feet apart, that works out very well. But then there's other times where they may have to go in and get tack equipment and they're moving in and out and they're touching the same things. Then as Angelo said, that becomes problematic. The same type of thing like for tennis. Well, if you're having 2 people training and they're on each side of the net, that's okay. But then if you get, the group together in your pod and you're talking to them, well, then you need to have your mask on and you need to be careful about sharing rackets or water bottles or towels or any of those kind of things. So as Angelo said, we have to treat them all similarly based upon the recommendations from all the different governing groups, but there are ones that are easier in terms of I can have 2 people on a tennis court and they're not going to be within a socially distanced area, but in basketball, they're touching each other in a sense most of the time when they're participating in a scrimmage type thing. So we're trying to deal with all those things because we want to try to, in a sense, stop a spread of the virus or be the ones who started the virus. It's going to be a very interesting semester. Optimistically, we're hoping that all the students can understand that and work together in providing some, experiences for each of the students.
Mike, Angelo, thank you. We'll circle back a little bit and talk more about those individualized sports with another couple of questions here. But this next question is slightly more of a broad spectrum, big picture question. What kind of lasting effects might the COVID-19 pandemic have on college athletics and even professional athletics?
So for some reason, I'm going to take the loaded questions, right? This is one we have no idea. I can answer this question about 12 different ways. From a medical standpoint, there's concerns of long-term heart issues. There's concerns of scarring in the lungs. There's concerns that athletes who have had COVID will never be able to compete again for those that have been sick. There's mental health concerns, right? Because our athletes are losing their identity. They have been athletes their whole lives, and it's being taken away from them for lack of better terms. So we've got a lot of that stuff to think about medically. It's going to change the way we travel. It's going to change, gone are the days where a coach is telling an athlete who's a little bit sick to hurry up and get to practice and just suffer through it. I think they're going to pay a lot more attention to symptomatic, symptoms and fever and those types of things. Financially, you've seen it already. There's colleges that are closing. There's athletic programs that are being cut. There's positions being lost all over the country, and unfortunately, some of the rich get richer the Power Five and Division I seem to be able to do whatever they want, and it doesn't hurt them, right? Their schools are cutting other sports, but it's all about football and basketball for the Power Five. We've been lucky. We haven't had to, knock on wood, cut anything as far as sports goes. Our full-time staff is safe for now, but the financial implications are huge, to the point where, you know, we may have to change the way we travel, our travel schedules, because if we're cutting budgets, potentially basketball teams going to you know, tournaments in other states may or may not happen. And again, we don't know all these repercussions. The professional teams are losing revenue like crazy. The professional teams don't know if they'll have people in the stands again. You know, who's going to want to pay that much money to be sandwiched next to 50 strangers? The professional teams and colleges are having people opt out, right? We're just not going to do it until everything is safe. So there's about 6 million different ways to answer this question. We need to be aware of our student medical needs, our student mental health needs especially. We need to be aware of providing some opportunities for these students, and hoping that at some point when we return to normal, we've saved our department, right? And we've kept it together, and we're going to hit the ground running. And the other part of this that we don't know how it's going to affect college sports, and I think, John, you had posted the question on the chat, which is a good segue to this. There's 10 different SUNYAC schools who've been told they can do whatever they want. So everybody's protocols are similar, but they're all a little different. So you're going to see different conferences doing different things. You're going to see, you know, there's talk out there about parts of the NCAA just crumbling. So there could be some implications from, you know, all the way down the chain. And just the fact that, you know, you've got coaches recruiting kids who haven't played in a year. You've got student athletes who haven't been able to compete in forever, and we don't know what recruiting classes are going to look like. We don't know who's going to want to come to college campuses. So again, there's a million different ways to answer this. Unfortunately, just like the rest of this pandemic, we don't know. We're putting together best practices in hopes that we can provide an experience for these great students, these great kids.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. I know that you have kind of had to answer the loaded questions, but we do certainly appreciate your perspective. Moving on to the next question, I'm going to kind of combine a couple questions here, specifically, again, about a couple different sports. So our women's golf team and our equestrian team are both non-SUNYAC teams. Since the decision to postpone the fall semester was made by the SUNYAC kind of as a collective, how are these non-SUNYAC sports affected?
It's a good question, Brett. And if you look at any of the other 9 schools besides ourselves that participate in the SUNYAC, each of us have a few sports that are not part of the conference. Rockport has football, Buff State has football, Cortland has football. Couple of them have gymnastics, some have wrestling, and so they're involved in different conferences. But as a whole, all of us put, even the sports that aren't within the SUNYAC conference, we treated them all similarly in a sense. And so we're doing the same things, at least on our campus, for each of the sports, in that we're not competing during the fall semester for any of them, but we will be practicing or training, whichever word you'd like to prefer. So equestrian and golf will still be practicing, training. They just would not be competing if, for equestrian, IHSA, their organization, did actually have events, we would not be competing in them. At the present time, I don't believe the IHSA is going to have any with those that are considered NCAA level. Some are considered club sports at other institutions, so I'm not sure how they will look at their sports there. We're kind of looking at any of our club sports to be similar to our collegiate sports, and how we look at them in terms of practicing, training, whatever it may be, and not having any competition. Golf is part of an NCAA sport and part of the Northeast Women's Golf Conference, and they will not be competing in any competitions in the fall. Both of them, the golf and the equestrian, then is looking to compete in the spring. So even though they're not part of the SUNYAC, all of us within the different schools within the SUNYAC have looked at no competitions for the fall. There are some that are looking at maybe in the winter, maybe having a competition, but I think as time has gone on forward, they have pretty much pulled back from that thought process and not going to start any competitions till after the first of the year.
Mike, while we're on those split season sports, golf, tennis, equestrian, I know that a decision has been made by the SUNYAC already for tennis. How are split season sports such as equestrian and golf, who compete in both the fall and the spring, how is their scheduling being affected for the spring semester?
At the present time right now, we haven't changed anything. For equestrian, it may be a little different. They may have to change a little because they had more of their shows in the fall semester than they did in the spring. So there's talk of maybe moving some of those shows into the spring that were normally in the fall so that they would have enough competitions to be able to compete in that. For the golf and for the tennis, they're just looking at how they would normally run the spring, but moving their championships to the spring semester where previously it was in the fall semester. So they're just moving their championship or their conferences to the spring, which would coincide with the NCAA having their championships in the spring.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. All right. Moving on to our next question. What about club sports? Will students be able to gather for those club sports, and will that be handled in a similar way to our varsity intercollegiate sports?
So I'm going to take this one. Some of you may or may not know the club sports are actually run through student activities. So all the student activities guidelines that are being put in place are going to mandate what the club sports can and can't do. And so in that regard, right now, the campus gatherings policy call for, no campus gatherings, events, activities through September 20th. Once September 20th rolls around, then the club sports will be able to work with student activities to get organized, start having practices, start getting together with all the same guidelines and rules and regulations that everybody else has. They can have in-person gatherings. They have to try to remain 6 feet apart, wear face masks when they're having meetings, try not to share objects. So the club sports are certainly going to be limited by the different rules and regulations that are in place. But as of September 20th, they will be able to start practicing and start getting together on campus. And that really goes for our student athletes as well. If they want to try to do some things outside of their typical practice sessions on their own, they'll have to wait till September 20th to be able to do so, following the campus gatherings policies.
Thank you, George. How will this pandemic and the corresponding cancellation of sports affect the financial position and salaries of coaches as well as their contracts? And this is another guest submitted.
It's somewhat simple in some regards. With our coaching staff and personnel being part of what's called the UUP, which is United University Professions. It's the union that represents our faculty and staff on campus. And so there are negotiated contractual obligations. And so most of our coaches and staff have a contract. And so they would have to be to, in a sense, remove someone as a head coach or a full-time staff member. They would have to have been notified when their contract ended 45 days prior to that end of their contract with a notice that they would have a year notice, year and 45 days notice that they would not be rehired. So in terms of that, none of our full-time staff are not going to be working for us during the year. They may be taking on some other duties in replacement of competitions, things of that nature, secondary duties that might have dealt with game management, things of that nature. The state does, and in the contract, does not recognize furloughs. So we can't furlough people because it's not a recognized thing within the contractual obligation with the state, as well as another term that many people use is retrenchment. And retrenchment, you would have to give people a year's notice that you were retrenching them within the department, whether it was a program or what it may be. They would have to have a year's notice. And then if they were retrenched, the program was retrenched, if that program was tried to be brought back online in a sense, within 4 years, the person who was retrenched would be allowed to have first crack at coming back for that position. So furloughs, retrenchment really are not something that is in the discussionary status at this time because of the union contract negotiations. That wording is not in there other than the retrenchment and those stipulations that I mentioned. So all of our staff are going to be working. They may be having slight adjustments in their performance program to cover some of the things that they wouldn't be doing because of the virus. And so they're still going to be working here full time. During this past 25 weeks that the state and the college has had most people working remotely. The only people that have been on campus have been those people who are deemed essential. So I have been here for the 25 weeks, somewhat lonely at times when you're the only person in the office. But the other people have been working remotely and doing their job in a sense from home. And we've been trying to do as good as we can with those different things. And as we go forward, we're hoping that from a financial standpoint, we can continue to improve our status there. We've been very limited on what we can purchase based upon the state and the college being in a little bit of a financial difficulty. We had to refund part of the athletic fee last spring. The fee for the fall will be somewhat limited, so that will cut back again on our income levels. So we're trying to look at any ways we can to minimize our expenses and continue to move forward. So it's not a perfect scenario, but we continue to work at trying to make the best with what we have at the moment.
Thank you, Mike. This is another one of our pre-submitted questions. Once sports are able to start up again, how will the travel work? Will there be travel party limitations? Will there be any sort of, I guess, policies regarding travel?
I'll take this one. Thank you, Brett. Unfortunately, I'm not going to probably have too satisfying of an answer here for you. I think it's really difficult at this point, and it's too early to know exactly what travel will look like and what competition will look like, because as with any decision making that has happened in the midst of this pandemic, there are just so many moving parts and a multitude of offices that we have to wait on direction from. The governor, SUNY Central, the SUNYAC, and the NCAA. But once we wrap our heads around that, and if that does happen to come to fruition, we will set our policies and procedures to align with those guidelines.
Thank you, Jess.
So we did have one additional question come through the chat. The question is full-time coaching staff have been referred to as, quote, safe for now. What about coaches that are considered part-time? And Mike, you can correct me if I don't get this quite right, but I believe the head coaches that are part-time are also in good shape. You know, we need to have head coaches in place to run our programs. The parts of the coaching staff that might have issues with us are our part-time assistant coaches. It's going to be difficult for us to offer them contracts, new contracts, given the financial implications of the virus. But the head coaches that are considered part-time are also, I would say, quote, safe for now.
Tracy, did we have any other submitted questions from our guests, or are we?
No other questions came in at this time. Brett, I do believe you did receive one question directly to you. Did that get answered?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Then I guess we can ask anyone in attendance now if there's any other questions they have for the panelists today. You can just unmute your microphone and ask it. Or if you feel more comfortable typing in the chat, you have about 3 or 4 minutes.
I'll just ask, I mean, how specifically are the athletes being informed of a lot of these policies? I don't know that I've seen it specifically, which is fine. It may go directly to them, because I know there's a lot of this stuff that they may be asking as well.
Yeah, sure. I can answer that one, Randy. We developed a fact sheet for the student athletes over time, and obviously it changed. And it was probably about 3 weeks ago now that we sent that fact sheet to the coaches for them to forward on to all their student athletes, that really kind of outlined what our plan was at the time. Thankfully, I think at this point, that plan hasn't changed very much. The last 3 weeks have been fairly static as far as the new regulations or recommendations coming out. So it gave them all the dates of when they'd be starting up, all the different aspects of what we expected of them as far as coming in the building and visiting the training room and coming to practice and staying within their pods and all that kind of stuff was all in the fact sheet. And we tried to alleviate as many possible questions that we might get as possible before they came up.
All right.
So I see there's an additional question that came in. It says, what needs to change or not change between now and January for winter sports to open? That's a great question. That came from John. I think a lot's going to depend on the numbers and the transmission rates across New York State. I think it was a positive sign that the governor is starting to allow the high school sports to start back up again within region. I think that's really one of the keys, is whether we'll be able to travel outside our region to compete or not. It makes it tough if we have to stay in region to compete, to find enough opponents to have a season. So I think those are the types of things that will need to come into play if we want to try to get our winter sports up and running. Mike, do you have anything else to add to that?
A lot of it is, as George said, is going to be based upon travel. And one of the questions that Jess was saying earlier about the transportation, bus companies may come back to us and say, you're only allowed so many people on the bus. It has to be every other seat. Well, if we figure that out and that may be 15 people, well, that's not going to work for a hockey team to play. That's not going to work for equestrian to go because they take considerably more to a show. So a lot will depend on some of the outside entities that make decisions for us, and then be able to do it safely. And one of the things is the virus is similar to the cold and flu, and the cold and flu season is November, December, January, February, into March. So we just don't know where this is going to take us. Will it get better? Will it get worse? Will we have immunizations that might make a difference in some areas and things? So there's a lot of unknowns. That's why we typically have, as athletic directors, been meeting every week to kind of see what things are coming about and what things we can either do or can't do, and sharing information, because our goal is to allow the students to have a great experience. And so we're trying to find ways that we can provide for that, as many have said. But going forward, we've seen where things change on a daily basis, and hopefully they'll continue to go in the right direction.
Oh, John Winthrop, do you need something, sir?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of Zooming, so I know I've learned to raise my hand. For those of you who don't know, I do a lot of, I'm in advancement, Director of Special Development, and if I haven't connected with you outside the limits a little bit, but one of the things that we who are alums and non-alums and love Geneseo Athletics need to make sure we pay attention to the what's going on with the Roundtable Athletic Association and the fundraising, because in times like this, finances are stretched, and we hope that all the alumni and any that you know who are not on this call pay attention to the appeals that will be coming out and what we're trying to do to keep the program going in ways that private support makes such a difference. So thanks for letting me say my pitch.
All right, thanks, John. Last call for questions. I think we're wrapping up. We're about 15 minutes to go in the hour, but we can let you go a few minutes early and you can all get your lunches in before you have to go back to work. Any last questions? All right, thank you so much to those folks in athletics, our panelists who helped make this program possible. Thank you to the alumni who joined the call. I hope you learned a lot. If you want to learn more about how you can help your former team, your organization, just contact me and we can figure out how to get your affinity chapter up and running and how you can support the current athlete. And otherwise, everybody have a great day. And maybe we'll do one of these when we know more about what might happen in fall or winter. Maybe we'll do a new update when there's big changes. All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye all.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right, just us now, so, okay. Bye, Brett.